At this moment, I'm going to introduce the other panelists, and if you could just raise your hands when I say your names. Janie Lee. Janie Lee is a senior at Troy High School in Orange County and the state president of the California Association of Student Councils, a nonprofit student-led organization that provides leadership development for students with an emphasis of authenticity, ethics, and collaborative decision-making through peer counseling. We're also joined by Ruby Reed. Ruby Reed is a social worker and community organizer who is currently the California Field Director for the Courage Campaign, a multi-issue advocacy network that empowers more than 700,000 grassroots and networks activists to push for progressive change and full equality in California and across the country. We're also joined by Javier Lafianza of the Hugh O'Brien Youth Leadership Organization, which is a service organization. In 2009, Lafianza was appointed to the board of directors of Albert Schweitzer's Leadership for Life, a youth leadership program committed to developing and presenting youth leadership and mentorship programs to 15 to 17-year-olds in the US. And finally, we're joined by Megan Carberry from Rock the Vote. And Megan is the organization's communications director for the 2010 midterm election cycle. And building off her first gig as a Chicago Tribune reporter and columnist, Megan later became Ariana Huffington's chief of staff and then went on to work as an independent journalist and web entrepreneur. So my question to the panelists, and we can just begin with you, Javier, and move down, is this generation, you think, more empathetic than the previous generation, or at least the 60s generation, or is it a matter of perception?
I think it's a matter of perception. I work with students every day that are really involved in their life. I think one of the messages that society gives to young people that we try to change a bit is that they're the future leaders of tomorrow. It's a term that we really work very hard to get people to understand and realize that kind of as your film said, that if you take action now, and that leadership is about process, it's not about position. Taking action now, you can make a difference now. And we know, I could spend hours talking about young people who are making a difference in their schools, in their communities, in the world. I just think it's really, how people are perceived or how media presents things that doesn't really, it's not as exciting to present the story of a young person who's tutoring kids in their spare time as to present a story of a young person who might be, breaking into homes or something like that in their own time.
Is it a case that this generation is just overwhelmed by media messages?
Well, certainly there are a number of media messages. I mean, their participation among young people has increased significantly over the last 10 years. Midterm election over midterm, presidential over presidential. A lot of people wanted to compare 2010 to 2008, which from a political science standpoint and otherwise is a little bit unfair. So if you look at the general drop-off in the population, it wasn't that strange that you didn't see the same number of people that you did a couple years ago in that sense. But the numbers are in people's favor, and that's a result of groups or like the ones up here that organize on the ground and, again, as you pointed out, do things in real life and go knocking on doors like at Rock the Vote. We always do trick or vote, right, because it's always Halloween before Election Day and people wear costumes. So you have to make it fun and young and give it, its own shape and vibe. And so yeah, there's a ton of artists and people doing work out there that are encouraging young people to do something. But again, I think it's about whether or not people command the respect of the habits of this generation. There was, some talk about multitasking and whatnot. It's not necessarily multitasking or diminishing your ability if younger people's identities are online, that there is a lot of nuance in the consistency of an update. And to someone who is participating in a digital way, that they might feel strongly about that. In Washington, D.C., when you go to the White House or you go to Congress and a leader is going to stand up and support you and your bill, they want to know how many people are going to be behind them with you. And this is a chance to actually quantify that. You know how many people are signing these petitions, and it's a lot more visible. So in some ways, that's an advantage.
Diddy, we heard about all the factors influencing your generation, all the negative factors, an overwhelming advertising media culture that promotes materialism. We heard about an absence of parental direction, at least compared to other generations, a loss of history or a lack of sense of history, a lack of government financial support of educational alternatives. The fact that incomes are diminishing, and that means that people don't have time to look at bigger issues. Where do you find your motivation among all that kind of environment?
So as a student and while watching this documentary, 3 big factors came into my mind, and they were attitude, skills, and knowledge. And first, just in terms of attitude and the attitude towards youth and the attitudes that youth have, I mean, this summer in August, I was in Sacramento lobbying for a bill at the governor's office, and this bill, Senate Bill 1422, was a bill that requested that we respect student voice and give them a chance to give feedback to their teachers that's completely confidential and stays within the teacher. And when I met with Paul Navarro, the chief legislative director, and told him what the bill was about, he buried his head. And with that kind of attitude, as a youth, I felt very discouraged. And I think the attitude towards youth being that youth are incompetent or that we are apathetic is very discouraging. But at the same time, when you look at the skills and knowledge that we do have, in terms of knowledge, I have probably 90% of my friends who can't locate Greece on a map. And as sad as that is, that's the reality of it, and the knowledge that, you know, even though we know the current events that are going on, we're once again faced by this overwhelming fact of this is such a huge issue. How am I as a 17-year-old, as a 15-year-old going to attack this? And it's the exact same mentality as I had before going to my first CAS conference was, how am I going to solve poverty? And I think it's this issue that also affects my attitude as a teenager, is it's such a huge issue that I can't attack it, which is something that this documentary really highlights. And that's because we don't have skills, which is the last thing that came into my mind. And the reason that I am as active as I am now, 3 years later, where beforehand I was just a student, you know, with this banking method of learning, depositing knowledge into my head and reciting it back out. The reason why, you know, I had such a drastic turnaround was because I was given the skills. And as I was given the skills, the one person who's influenced me to become an activist said that, you know, the opposite of war is not peace, the opposite of war is creation. Not doing bad isn't doing good, not doing bad is doing nothing. So with that, he started, you know, and through this organization of CAST where we emphasize training students how to do things. That's when I realized that, you know, I can attack poverty. I'm not going to solve it in a day, but if I'm given the skills to do it, my attitude's going to change. And the students I work with are doing tremendous things before they're, you know, legal to do anything else. And that's because they have all 3 factors of attitude, skills, and knowledge. And I think that's something that this documentary really emphasizes. And I mean, just looking at the audience, I mean, how many people here are less than 18? And I think students really need to see this and realize that we do need all 3 things.
Hey, Jenny, who gave you this skill? You said you were given this skill.
So, I went to my first conference from CAS, which is why I got so deeply involved, called the Youth Action Summit of California, where we're attacking global issues and breaking them down into a thing called a project planning era, where we're actually taking home a concrete plan.
Ruby, your organization, Courage Campaign, I think is all about promoting critical thinking in the youth. Is that fair enough to say?
Yeah, the Courage Campaign is a multi-issue progressive organization, so we understand that people aren't necessarily brought to a movement or brought to take action because of the exact same thing for each person. So, you know, we work on marriage equality, we're working on repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, we work on things in California governance, things about human rights, things about making sure people have access to health care, education, a lot of different kinds of issues. So one thing that I kept being reminded about when I was watching this film was we just recently saw Proposition 19, the effort to legalize and tax cannabis here in California, come very close to passing just this past election. And one of the main things that Courage was involved with was helping to motivate action and activism, on college campuses. And on the campuses where we organized, we did things like polling places ran out of ballots because we had so many students who were there voting. You know, they went to vote for Prop 19, but they voted for the rest of the issues that were on the ticket. So I think one of the main things for especially engaging with youth is to find what are those things that are important to us as youth, you know?
It's not just about the war in Iraq, this big war. It's about, my cousin and your brother who are out there, on the front line. So really bringing it home to folks in terms of what does this mean to me personally in my life? I think one of the really nuanced things about this film is it really talks about our relationship of sort of protecting our own abilities to self-sustain versus a larger vision of a community that that's sustainable in that way. So that's really what Courage is involved with, is helping people find that thing that brings them to the movement, and then to give them, like you said, the tools and the skills and knowledge to be able to move that forward.